The truth about the Yellowstone River Valley you need to know to survive. About 6 weeks ago, I ventured into the wilderness of eastern Montana with my 2-year-old hunting dog, a Labrador named Buddy, to hunt upland birds and fly fish for trout. This area is high rocky desert and cuts a deep valley through hills covered in desert scrub and black rock cliffs. Something happened in that canyon that altered everything I knew, or thought I knew, about the world we live in. Before getting into the events, I'll start with a little backstory. I had done the exact same trip with 2 buddies last November, during my dog's first hunting season, and we were all thrilled at the prospect of doing it again. Unfortunately, one of the guys backed out due to work pressure, and the other because he needed time to prepare for an interview. So, I decided to go alone. I've done plenty of solo camping and hunting trips before, and this time I had my hunting dog with me, so I felt even more confident heading out by myself. Obviously, there's no mobile reception out there, so I told my girlfriend and a few buddies my route and campsite locations, and set off before dawn on Friday with plans to return late Sunday evening. It's about a 3-hour drive to the stretch of the Yellowstone River Valley where I was headed, and I got there around 9:30 a.m. It was about 40 degrees Fahrenheit, around 4 degrees Celsius, when I got out at the Forest Service lot to stretch and start getting ready for the hike. My dog was very excited. He knows when we're going hunting, when I put on my game bag and take out the long gun, and I was thrilled beyond measure. The sun was shining, and snow had fallen a few days earlier, so the valley, covered in reddish-brown, tan, black, and green desert scrub we started descending into, was shimmering. I had a large rucksack, packed to capacity with gear, and a handgun. I don't always carry a handgun, but 3 days and 2 nights alone in an area teeming with packs of prairie wolves, which don't scare me but wouldn't mind snacking on a Labrador, and a high density of pumas, which definitely do scare me, even though they're cool animals. I figured, what could be the harm? We, my dog and I, hiked about 6 miles into a more open part of the valley where I wanted to spend the first night. The temperature by this point was around 50 degrees Fahrenheit, 10 degrees Celsius, and it was utterly stunning, although quite muddy from the melting snow. I set up my tent on a small grassy plateau above the old trail and left the dog in the tent with some water to rest a bit and warm his paws. I had lunch, unloaded the bulk of my equipment, and headed further into the valley, taking only my hydration pack, game bag, shotgun, and the dog to start hunting, feeling as happy as a person could possibly be. The hunt started gradually, but eventually, we flushed a flock of grouse and several female partridges. After about 4 hours, it started getting dark. We had 3 grouse, and we were heading back to camp. That's when things started getting weird. Buddy was running ahead of me while I pushed through thick brush, trying to get back to the trail from the river. Suddenly, the dog darted back through the opening he had just entered, ears pinned back and eyes wide. He sort of cowered and paced nervously at my feet. This was uncharacteristic for him unless something like a slamming door or the noise of a leaf blower startled him. I looked ahead from where he'd come, and my immediate thought was, puma. I pointed my shotgun forward as if I were about to flush a bird and walked through the opening in the bushes, with Buddy reluctantly following close behind. I emerged into a clearing below the trail and caught sight of a tan-colored body lying low in the grass out of the corner of my eye. I whipped around to the right, bringing the shotgun to my shoulder, ready to fire. Then I saw hooves, and then a face, and with relief, as the adrenaline pulsed behind my eyes, I realized it was a female mountain goat lying in the grass. She was trembling violently, the whites of her eyes showing in terror, gnashing her teeth through foamy saliva, and wheezing like a sick old horse. I couldn't see any obvious breaks or puncture wounds on her. She was quite young, maybe 2 years old, and there was no place nearby she could have tumbled from. I figured she was just sick and dying. I even gave a slight shrug, as if to say, the wild can be cruel, sorry girl, good luck, and had to drag Buddy by the collar to the left, away from this strange, distressed creature. I've encountered dying deer and wapiti in the Sierra Nevadas where I grew up, and I knew that soon, since the camp wasn't far, I'd hear the awful sound of feasting prairie wolves. For those who haven't heard it, when prairie wolves descend on live prey, they yelp, growl, and create a horrific chorus of death. I wasn't eager to hear that old death song if it was going to happen because I knew it would scare my dog half to death. But what can you do? The wild is cruel. We reached the camp. I took a few photos of the sunset, roasted some grouse with potatoes, had dinner, fed the dog, drank some whiskey, and got inside the tent. The last thing I remember was worrying that the prairie wolves would find the dying mountain goat and wake us up. I woke up feeling eerily cold, my feet and hands numb, and an instant surge of adrenaline hit me. I fumbled for my headlamp, and when I switched it on, I saw my tent flap was halfway unzipped, and my dog was gone. Honestly, I panicked intensely and started shouting, "Buddy, come! Buddy! Come! Buddy!" As I jammed my numb feet into my boots and ran outside, a light wind was blowing, and there was a bit of moonlight, so I could see the shimmering river on the other side of the valley. I had my handgun in one hand, my dog whistle in the other, and I dashed around the campsite, calling the dog and shining my headlamp everywhere. Pumas keep irregular hours, and prairie wolves are nocturnal, and I was looking for blood, tracks, or anything. For those who haven't experienced it, when you lose your dog, a pretty intense alarm sets in, mine compounded by waking up in the middle of the dark wilderness. I think because of the panic, I didn't register that my tent flap was unzipped until about 60 seconds into my shouting. I looked at it again in the headlamp beam, lit it up as it fluttered in the wind, and kind of dismissed the thought, figuring Buddy might have pushed or rolled against the tent flap and slid the zipper down. Then I saw eyes staring from behind a boulder just down the slope. I started moving towards the eyes, aimed my handgun at the boulder below the eyes, and said sternly, "Buddy, come. Buddy." And the eyes looked away. I dashed down the slope and noticed some movement on top of the boulder. I went around the rock and saw it was Buddy. He was sitting up there as if I'd commanded him to sit with a treat in my hand, gazing across the valley at the river. He was shivering as if he'd just gotten out of an ice bath, and in the headlamp beam, I could see his breath, like cigarette smoke in the cold air. I said something like, "Buddy, what? Buddy, come. Heal. Heal." But he didn't move, didn't even take his eyes off the dark valley. Then I climbed onto the boulder, put my arms around him, and it was like he snapped out of it. He immediately went berserk, started growling, whining, and squirming, trying to get away. But then he noticed it was me, and his tail started thumping side to side. His growls turned into soft cries, and he literally attempted to leap into my arms. I picked him up, jumped off the large rock, and tried to calm him down a bit. I was right at the tent entrance when I heard a sound I'll never forget. It's hard to describe in writing, but it sounded partly animalistic, partly like a guy trying to sing a long, no, no, no note that grew with anxiety and a hint of pleading. I tossed Buddy into the tent, spun around with my handgun, and aimed it down the valley from where the sound came. At that moment, it seemed like the valley itself exhaled. A huge, windy groan, enveloped the dark ridge. Honestly, for the first time in my life, I felt like I might lose control of my bowels and soil myself right there, standing on the hillside. I saw all the grass and desert scrub near the trees and river tremble from the gust of wind. Buddy was barking like crazy, and I just retreated into the tent and zipped it almost completely shut, leaving a small gap to peek out. I tried to calm Buddy while loading my shotgun. The seemingly demonic exhale of wind died down, and Buddy curled up on my lap and whimpered while I just sat there with the handgun at my side and the shotgun pointed at the tent entrance. Only then did I see it was about 3:50 a.m., and I started thinking about what had happened and what to do. I knew that making a run for it the 6 miles up the valley in the dark to my truck was a huge risk. I had seen sudden gusts of wind before and knew that canyons and valleys are perfect places for them, and reasoned that's what it was. Then I tried to recall the types of birds and mammals in this region that could make such a sound. Montana has wolves, but not often in this area, and that no sound was too low-pitched for a prairie wolf. I thought it might have been something like a swan or a large bird near the water. And what the hell was my dog doing frozen, mesmerized by the darkness, on top of that rock? Maybe he just got out, got lost, and started suffering from cold exposure or something like that. I really had no idea and couldn't understand why I was so scared and tense. After college, I worked as a hunting, fishing, and hiking guide in Australia and the Andes, and I grew up spending time in the Wyoming wilderness. I've had run-ins with most North American predator species. I've administered first aid to people with head wounds miles from any road or trail. I've dug someone out of an avalanche, and I can't recall ever being this scared and tense. I'm no special forces soldier here, but I know how to maintain composure when things get intense in the backcountry, so I was pretty shaken up. A couple of hours later, I saw light in the sky, and then a hint of daylight entered the valley. I still hadn't warmed up properly, but I pulled on all my layers and extra socks, zipped Buddy securely in the tent, and went out to investigate the area briefly. There was nothing unusual, and no strange tracks could be found, aside from mountain goat and deer tracks. My nerves calmed down a bit. Eventually, I made coffee, ate an energy bar, fed the dog, and just sat there looking at Buddy. There were plausible, ordinary causes for most of the previous night's events. However, the one thing that kept bothering me was my dog. I got goosebumps thinking about the bizarre manner he was immobilized on top of that rock, staring into the darkness, and how he snapped out of his trance as soon as I touched him. I also couldn't shake the thought of how badly everything had frightened me the moment that sudden, demonic-sounding sigh, that gust of wind, picked up. I petted Buddy for a while and just watched him, almost wishing he could tell me what he saw after leaving the tent before I woke up. The wind picked up into a steady, cold, strong breeze, which successfully discouraged my plan to fly fish in the morning. I decided to dismantle the campsite and pack up, to either continue onward or head back to the truck. I hadn't decided yet, but I didn't want to panic and bail on the weekend without a solid reason other than strange things happening. I wasn't in any identifiable danger, which is the primary factor in any outdoorsman's decision-making process about whether it's time to leave, so I just didn't know what to do. After packing up, I was sitting with another cup of coffee when I heard some rustling among the stones up the valley over my right shoulder. Buddy heard it too, darted to the rise behind the tent, and stared up the slope as if indicating game, fur on his neck raised and everything. I walked over and stood behind him, expecting to see a deer or a mountain goat, but only saw a small rockfall on the loose rock slope about 100 yards from us. Again, I suspected a puma, as it definitely could have been startled by us and climbed into the steep boulder and rock formations at the top of the ridge. Small rockfalls happen without external influence, but something felt unnatural. Then the dog just bolted, spun about, and raced down the slope away from me and the small rockfall above us faster than I had perhaps ever seen him run. I yelled after him and blew my dog whistle, trying to get him to stop, but he ran all the way up the trail before looking back at me. Maybe it was me finally regaining my rationality, but I decided, screw this, we're getting out of here. I hoisted my rucksack onto my back and headed toward Buddy, who was now whining and pacing, looking back over my shoulder. Once I was near, he headed straight up the trail toward the truck, looking at me almost pleadingly, ears pinned back and a "dude, let's go" expression I'd never seen before. That made my skin crawl, so I just trudged after him, and we started the ascent. Progress was slow because the climb was out of the valley, and I wasn't moving very fast, constantly scanning the ridgeline to my right and the meadow with desert scrub to my left, towards the river. My shotgun was loaded because I hadn't completely given up on the idea of hunting on the way back, although Buddy didn't put his nose to the ground and only looked at the ridge and at me. Again, as if pleading for me to hurry. Besides, I was generally unnerved, and a loaded shotgun is a decent antidote to anxiety. After about an hour and a half, I realized we were probably no more than a mile from the truck because I remembered the canyon wall to the right became an almost vertical rock face with occasional narrow canyons leading up from the trail. When we were right at the entrance to one of these small mini canyons leading to the cliffs, Buddy stopped. He became motionless once more, as if he'd seen game, looking up into the rocks. I thought it might actually be a grouse, so I readied my shotgun and took a few steps up the ridge to see if Buddy would flush it as usual, but he started whining again, pacing, and even trembling slightly, jerking his head side to side, frantically scanning up and down the slope. Then I got worried. I realized something was wrong with him. I looked back and saw some movement between two large boulders. I aimed, thinking puma again, but saw two hooves, now thinking mountain goat or mule deer. I took a few steps up the steep slope towards the animal, to see if I could flush it up the ridge and get a look at what it was, and the wind started picking up, and twigs of desert scrub swirled around the small canyon with black rocks, and then Buddy started going crazy. He was growling and barking in a way I'd never heard before, but I started saying, "Buddy, stop. Buddy, no." Slowly rounding the corner to see the rest of the animal, and that's when my whole existence and worldview changed. Beyond that corner of the rock was definitely a mountain goat. It was standing on its hind legs, looking at the rock face, its front legs tucked unnaturally against its chest so I couldn't see them. It was shifting its balance from one hind hoof to the other, and it had massive curled ram horns, the kind I'd only seen on a few large males before. I was immediately startled by the spectacle and think I exclaimed something like, "What the hell," but somehow thought it was just trapped or jammed there, or had fallen vertically from above. Then it slowly started to step and turn, remaining solely on its hind legs. Then it sharply turned to face me, and it definitely wasn't stuck. It was literally standing comfortably, like a person, on its hind legs. It looked like a normal mountain goat, but its eyes were wide open, frighteningly human-like, and fixing their gaze on my midsection or waistline. Ridiculously copious foamy saliva dripped from its chattering jaw. I was stumbling and skidding backward, half a second away from shooting this monstrous goat in the face, when it looked directly into my eyes and cried out in a gasping, youthful tone with frightened, pleading insistence, "Please don't, please don't, don't." I tripped and tumbled down the path, while Buddy raced ahead of me along the track. I scrambled up and aimed my shotgun right at the spot. I saw the goat's horns sticking out and most of its face, as if it were looking out from behind the stones like a child playing hide-and-seek, and it was still looking right into my eyes. Then it jerked its head back behind the rocks. I could still hear it, but it sounded like it was weeping like a small child, repeating, "Please don't, please don't, please don't." Backing away, I realized I was yelling at it wildly, like I did when encountering black bears to try and scare them off, not saying anything coherent, while also yelling at my dog not to run off a mile ahead. After retreating 50 yards down the trail, I fired both my 12-gauge shotgun shells down the empty trail into the dirt and kept walking backwards. Buddy was at my heels by this point but still whining and barking. I swear, I walked the whole mile backwards, surveying frantically, knuckles white, grip like stone on my shotgun, until I caught a glimpse of the valley opening where my truck was. Then I just bolted. I ran like a youngster fleeing a nightmare. Buddy ran ahead of me, and when we reached the truck, I snatched the keys from my bag, threw the dog, bag, and shotgun into the vehicle, and sped out of the valley back to the county road like a drag racer. I stopped at the first town and tried to calm Buddy and myself down, but there was still no mobile reception. I went into the gas station, not really to buy anything, but just to speak with another person and make sure the monstrous goat or my insanity had remained in the canyon. I must have appeared as though I'd seen a ghost because the first thing the woman said was, "Are you okay, honey?" I bought a Powerade, drove back north to the freeway, and straight home. I haven't slept right since. My eating habits are completely disrupted. I can't focus at work. My dog has become extremely nervous and doesn't like going for walks at night anymore. I don't know what to do to get over the encounter with that talking, pleading, sobbing beast, but I know one thing for sure. I won't be hunting or camping alone anymore, and I will never set foot in the Yellowstone River Valley as long as I live. Absolutely no way.